half quarters, and then you pull away a little bit. You mentioned the run game concerns. A lot of people thought going into the season that even without Jaden Daniels, you have one of the best offensive lines in the country. You can just lean on them, and it'll all be fine. But I think the overall inability to find that run game, whether it's because of the offensive line, whether it's because of the lack of dynamic running back play, and obviously going from Jaden Daniels, who was a Heisman winner and could run for 100 yards per game, to Garrett Nussmeier, who's not as much of a running threat. So the offense lack of balance has been a little alarming, but at the same time, I think Garrett Nussmeier has shown everybody that what most people in Baton Rouge already knew, that he has elite arm talent and he's going to be a really good player. So I start on the offensive side of the ball because that's where LSU is going to have to continue to be really good moving forward.
Matt, you talk about Garrett Nussmeier there, and a guy that's been on campus for several years. I remember back, we had to come in for Daniels in the 2022 SEC Championship game against Georgia, and impressed a lot of people with what he did against that high-caliber defense. What was the belief in him coming into this year, and what have you seen from him so far through his first couple starts where he's put up really good numbers?
Yeah, I think from the outside, from a national perspective, I think he was underrated going into the year. I think a lot of people – some people had him outside the top half of the conference in terms of quarterback play, and I tried to continue to, say that he was going to be a good player and say that he has all the arm talent. And you mentioned that Georgia game where he was awesome. You mentioned he had the Wisconsin game last year in the bowl game where he was awesome. He's come in for Jaden Daniels the last 2 years and just been nothing but really good. So I had no reason to believe he was going to fall off, and the arm talent is obvious for anybody who's watched him. So I think he's exceeded expectations on the outside, but in terms of what LSU thought they had, in terms of what people who follow LSU thought they had, I think there's been no surprise. He's extremely accurate. He just has to continue to do what he's doing, and I think he has a good enough receiver room and a good offensive line that'll help him, stay comfortable.
Matthew, can you take us through the running game a little bit right now? Obviously, you got the guys up front, like whether it's in pass protection or in the running game. Like, this is certainly the best test South Carolina's going to face to this point in terms of offensive line. And, maybe even by the end of the year might be the best O-line they face all year. But obviously there's been a big injury at the running back position. I saw that LSU moved a kid, I think, from the secondary last week, a freshman who was very accomplished in high school and actually got on the field from what I saw last week against Nichols. So can you just provide those sort of details on the running back room and kind of the running game in general, I guess, as they kind of have had to, refocus some things there?
Yeah, so going into the year, we knew it was going to be a shallow position group already. One of their running backs who would not have started, but would have been like a reserve, is facing some legal stuff in his hometown right now, so he's not available. And then John Emery, who is out for the season now with the torn ACL, was already coming off of an ACL injury, so we didn't know what we were going to see from him, and lo and behold, he ends up having a great game against USC before ultimately tearing his other ACL. So just a really tough situation there. But with that being said, you still have Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams, two capable running backs. I think what Brian Kelly, when he's asked about it, talks about is the fact that Nicholls State and USC were willing to give up some short yardage passes and to make Garrett Nussmeier be accurate in the short game and try to bring safeties down to help against the run and really focus it on making LSU one-dimensional, which they did for the most part. LSU's throwing the ball north of 60% of their snaps, and that's in large part because of what defenses are doing to them in terms of loading the boxes and really being aggressive against their run. So, we know, I think looking at South Carolina's games through the first 2 weeks, I think teams have had some success running on them. I think part of that is schematically. So I'm interested to see how South Carolina approaches it, and then obviously how LSU responds off that.
Again, talking to Matthew Brune, covers LSU for On 3. And Wes mentioned a moment ago how great this offensive line is. No sacks allowed this season, 4 returning starters from a year ago. And Beamer mentioned in his press conference yesterday that Will Campbell specifically, I think, has only given up 3 sacks and 1,600 some odd snaps in his career. So we're all interested to see this dynamic of how South Carolina's pass rush does against this offensive line. In the time this group has been playing offensive line for LSU, who has given them their toughest test? Who has had the most success against them in the time they've been out there?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is Jared Verse in that Florida State game last year. Not just Jared Verse, but they had, Braden Fisk and Patrick Payne and some other guys. Really good defensive line, obviously, on the Florida State team last year that went undefeated in the regular season. That season opener last year, I think, was eye-opening at the time. You mentioned it. I mean, this is a Joe Moore Award finalist from last year and returns 4 out of 5 starters. Both tackles are projected to be first-round draft picks. I mean, both guards, I think, are awesome college players and will probably be drafted as well. And then you have a sophomore center who's finding his way, but is a high 4-star guy at 6'6", and has a ton of strength on him that's learning the position. So I think from a pass protection standpoint, I want to say it's the best in the country. I'm not an offensive line guru. I'm not Cole Cubelic out here breaking it down. But, I mean, from a talent perspective, I think it's the most talented pass protection unit in the country. The question has come in the run game more so than anything. So, if LSU gets into obvious passing situations, I'm interested to see how South Carolina does in terms of pass rush, but also just watching the first 2 games, I think South Carolina did a great job with their blitzes, with changing up their looks, with bringing people from different areas, and that more than anything is what I'm interested in, because that's not just about pass protection, that's not just about how good Will Campbell is, but that's about communicating and obviously finding the blitzes and picking it up, and Garrett Nussmeier being aware of all that. So I think it's a great challenge, and that's definitely the matchup to watch for.
Matthew, looking at this matchup from our perspective, like after watching South Carolina for 2 games, I mean, this is a completely different game than what South Carolina saw with Kentucky. I think just in terms of strengths and weaknesses of the 2 schools, and then even just the approach. Like you look at Kentucky and that Stoops defense, like for the most part, they're going to drop back into their zone, and they're going to kind of play their zone the way they always have under Stoops, and there are certain ways you have to attack it. I look at Kentucky, I look at LSU, at least from what I've seen so far, that does not seem to be the case. I read, I think LSU has maybe blitzed on almost half of the defensive snaps so far this year. What can you tell us about Blake Baker, the new defensive coordinator's sort of approach? For people who haven't been following it, he came over from Missouri, very highly respected name in the coaching business, and I thought that was just a blue blood move from LSU to just say, hey, we're just going to take you from Missouri. But what can you tell us kind of schematically, like what is the approach of Blake Baker on defense, and how does it maybe compare to what LSU did last year?
Yeah, you mentioned getting Blake Baker from Missouri. I mean, another point in that is the fact that Blake Baker went to college at Tulane down here, spent a lot of time in Louisiana, has roots here. So I think that also helped in him coming back. But, yeah, you mentioned in 2 years at Missouri, he was fantastic. I mean, he took over a unit that was very, very mediocre and limited on talent, and turned them into back-to-back years of being a top 30 defense in a lot of metrics, and one of top 10 in sacks, one of the highest pressure rates and havoc rates in the country. He really did a great job developing linebackers. Tyron Hopper ends up being a really high-level linebacker for them with a ton of TFLs. So LSU getting him over here at Baton Rouge, I think makes a huge difference in terms of, like you said, bringing the aggression, being able to be on the forefront, on the front foot, and overall just having a different mindset. The last 2 years under Matt House were a lot of reacting, and I think this year under Baker they've done a good job of, imposing themselves. Even in the USC game where they ended up losing, Miller Moss had a good game at quarterback, but there were some key plays where on third downs they were able to bat down a pass or hit him and just, force an incompletion when they needed to. And so they're looking to be more aggressive. obviously when you play a team like USC, who's as sharp as they are, and Lincoln Riley, I think they were able to expose that at times. But for, a lot of USC, or for a lot of SEC play, I think LSU should continue to get better and have a pretty good defense.
You mentioned Blake Baker when it comes to developing Tyrone Hopper a couple years ago, and one of the big keys about him coming to LSU was getting the most out of Harold Perkins, who is now seemingly a committed linebacker, despite having a lot of success coming off the edge a couple seasons ago. What's your assessment of how Perkins has done in this system so far, and keeping him at linebacker up to this point?
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. I think Harold Perkins is a fascinating player, and he's incredible. I mean, he's an example of a player who is a perfect athlete, but without a perfect position. At 6'1", about 220 or so, he's not as big as a lot of inside linebackers in the SEC. I think if you look at a player LSU developed into being a very, very solid player, or Blake Baker developed in particular, is Damone Clark at inside linebacker, who's now in the NFL playing well. He's about 6'3", 240. He takes on blocks a lot better than Harold did. And then if you talk about edge rushers, a lot of people compare Harold Perkins to even a Michael Parsons. Well, Michael Parsons is 6'3", 245 as well. So we're talking about a size difference here that really puts Harold in an interesting spot where he doesn't have a true position. And that's been kind of the trouble for LSU. It was trouble for Matt House. It was and now it's the problem for Blake Baker. And I think he spends the entire year at linebacker. I think he's going to get better. But ultimately, it is an uphill challenge because he is such an incredible athlete that there are expectations that he makes, 2 TFLs per game, and that just hasn't been what's been happening. So I'm interested to see if against Lenore Sellers, if he has a more impactful role, either as a spy or just going sideline to sideline and getting to him.
Matthew, real quick here before we have to hit a break, give us your final sort of key to victory for this game. What needs to happen for either side to feel good about winning it?
Yeah, I think I'll go from the perspective of LSU's defense, South Carolina's offense. Obviously, we know South Carolina has been incredibly run-heavy to this point. I think LSU coming into this game without Jacoby and Guillory, defensive tackle, who's out for the year, one of their best defensive tackles. I'm interested to see how LSU stops the run. I think LSU is going to have to load the box up. They're going to have to play probably a 4-3 a lot more than they play a 4-2-5, and they're going to be very, very physical. So they're going to have to match that physicality from South Carolina, stop the run, and force Lenore Sellers and that pass game into some obvious passing situations.
Should be a great game. Looking forward to it on Saturday, and I appreciate your time once again, Matthew.
Thank you all for having me anytime.
And Matthew Brune from LSU's On 3 site coming up for this weekend's game against South Carolina. We'll continue on with the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here on the game.
All right, guys. We've been telling you about our friends at Classic Roofing for months now, and you know already, hey, Joe Reeder, Max Sawyer, they're going to take great care of all of your roofing needs, whether that's residential or commercial. Call them today, 803-590-7870, classicroofingsc.com. Now, Joe and Mac, they have loads of experience in the roofing game. They're also South Carolina guys who are right here in your community. So let's support people in our community, people that are going to be taking care of your roof because they've done it really for over 20 years combined. Their team of experts is well equipped to handle any and all of those roofing requirements. That could be a residential project. That could be a huge commercial undertaking, or really anything in between that. Of course, if you own a home, you got to make sure that roof is taken care of, and you're going to want to have peace of mind that your roof is taken care of. Call them today, 803-590-7870, or head on over to set up a free estimate at classicroofingsc.com.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes along with you on this Wednesday here on The Game. Reminder coming up on Friday, Love Chevrolet High School Football Scoreboard Show with Justin Hall and Elijah Campbell. 7 to 11 p.m., letting you know everything that's going on around the Midlands as far as high school football goes and leading you right into a full weekend of college football, which, of course, will be highlighted by South Carolina and LSU, not only here locally, but nationally as well with game day and all that stuff coming into town. And again, appreciate Matthew Brune from LSU's On 3 site joining us there in the last segment. One thing that we talked about was this dynamic of Carolina's pass rush versus LSU's fantastic offensive line. And that was something else that Beamer alluded to yesterday. I mentioned the quote that he had about Will Campbell. Let's get cut number 12 here if we can, Dave. This is Coach Beamer talking about that battle for Saturday between the pass rush and LSU's offensive line.
A little of both. Back to the first question, Kentucky was going to help their tackles some, and then they were going to leave those tackles alone at times. There's the clip I've seen when we showed it to the team the other day. I mean, there was one play where Kentucky tried to block Dylan Stewart with 3 different people, and he went through all 3 of them and made a play on the quarterback on a throwaway. So we're prepared for that. We knew that going into last week, and that's fine. There's other ways to generate pressure. We've got some pretty good defensive tackles, too, if they want to use 4 guys blocking our edges. That's great for Boogie and Tonka and TJ and those guys as well. And then as far as LSU, they do a good job, I think, of mixing things up, Phil. I mean, they use multiple tight end sets, and they shift and motion and give you different looks, and they'll roll the pocket out a little bit to move the quarterback and get him on the edge. They'll keep tight ends and chip and then get out, and then certainly I'm sure they're going to feel extremely confident with their 2 offensive tackles of not giving them any help. If I'm not mistaken, the 66, the tackle, he's played 1,700 career snaps, and he's given up 3 sacks. So, I'm not great at math. What is that? Almost once every 600 snaps, he gives up a sack. So I'm sure he feels pretty good going into Saturday. And the sacks he gave up were to Jared Verse from Florida State, who's in the NFL right now, Will Anderson from Alabama, who's in the NFL right now, and a quarterback scramble. So, I'm sure they're extremely confident, and it's a big challenge for our guys, and I'm excited to watch Kyle and Dylan and the rest of our defensive ends, edge group, as well as our defensive tackles, how they combat LSU's offensive line. Told them this morning in our team meeting, I mean, what an opportunity for our guys to get to go compete against what many say is the best offensive line in the country.
And that's not understating it. That is one of the, if not the best offensive lines in the country. And, this is the true litmus test for how good this pass rush is. Because, yes, did it against Old Dominion. You did against a UK offensive line that wasn't as good as maybe we thought going into last week. If you can have success against this group on Saturday, there's nobody you can't get a pass rush on this year.
Yeah, it's going to be an absolute heavyweight fight in the trenches in this game. And I'm here for it. And I think you got to prepare yourself to, hey, there are going to be there's going to be some battles that LSU is going to win in this one. And there's going to be some battles that South Carolina wins. Like, this thing is not going to be like the last 2 weeks where Carolina was just, for the most part, dominant, especially in terms of creating havoc. And, I think if I'm LSU, here's the thing. I trust those guys in pass protection. And, they come out because of their questions at running back and just in the running game in general. They throw the ball very aggressively, and they throw the ball down the field. And so I think that's something, you haven't really seen a lot of if you're South Carolina yet this year. Obviously, Kentucky really struggled with it because they couldn't protect it. Kentucky had some success running the football in between the tackles, and, a lot of it was even more inside than that, in between the guards. Like, they're going right up the middle, and they kind of tried to be balanced, and it was when they tried to do anything else that they got just nothing done, and a lot of times it created negative plays. LSU's MO this year has not been to run the ball up the middle. I think they're going to watch the film. Not that they're not going to trust their guys to just drop back and throw, but I think they're going to say, we're going to try to attack South Carolina in the running game up the middle and try to stay out of those 3rd and long situations. if Carolina can get them in some third and long situations, I think it's going to be very, very fascinating to see who wins those battles, because we've seen Carolina so far when they've gotten teams in those sort of money downs where you can go pin your ears back and go after the quarterback. Carolina's gotten there, and it's been pretty dang consistent. It's going to be a lot more sort of coin flippish, I think, in terms of sometimes one side will win, sometimes the other will.
Yeah.
I'll be curious to see within their game plan. Like, there's been a lot of talk from people sort of questioning, like, hey, why is LSU, even though they have questions at running back, why are they not trying to establish the run a little bit more? I suspect they will this week. I'm fascinated to see what the game plan is going to be on both sides, because I do think Carolina has a defense that, I mean, we've seen it. They've been fantastic. But I do think a little bit the way they're built, they're super athletic. They're going to out-athlete most teams they play up front. But that does leave them a little susceptible to where at times they're going to give up those 6, 7, 8-yard gains. Now, you're going to hope from a Carolina perspective that with that is also going to come the big negative plays, and that kind of balances out, and that havoc rate is going to still be pretty high. But LSU, I could see a world where LSU says, look, we're going to ground this thing the way Kentucky tried to do, but then LSU has the weapons to actually, I think, and the pass protection to maybe have some balance and hit you down the field as well.
And I don't think this can be overlooked, because I'm checking the latest weather reports now. It looks like it is going to rain on Saturday. So this could be a messy, muddy type of slog type of game where you may be kind of forced to run the ball a little bit more than you want to. And again, two teams that have not been able to run at a super successful clip this season. It could come down to that being a key factor in this game.
I'll be curious to see if Dow Loggins is asked about that today, because he actually has a philosophy of if it's snowing or raining, throw the football. Because if the field does get sloppy, especially against a cornerback group for LSU, which you got some strength on strength, you got some questions on questions as well. Mm-hmm. South Carolina's wide receivers, we've talked about them literally all offseason. Who's going to step up? LSU's secondary is actually in a similar spot to South Carolina's receivers. They've been shuffling some guys in. Mm-hmm. It's been questions there. It's very strange to be talking about LSU's defense and saying they have questions at defensive tackle and in the secondary. Traditionally, I mean, I know you've watched SEC ball your whole life too, Tyler.
Yeah.
I almost think of those spots being like plug and play.
Sure.
It'll be a different name on the back, but LSU just always has star defensive tackles and guys in the secondary. That's not the case right now. And so I think that there is a philosophy that if the field gets muddy, the receivers know which direction they're going. The cornerbacks do not. So if you can still grip the ball and throw in the weather, there's a thought that maybe you have a little bit more success doing that than people think. I'm hoping somehow there's a window where it doesn't rain during that 3.5 hours, because, dude, this is exciting. You can already feel the excitement building in the air. We're sitting here. We got SEC Network and ESPN on. They're talking about South Carolina more on a national level because of this game than you've seen in a while. And it is a tremendous opportunity for this, not just team, but for this program, I think.
We'll get into some of Beamer's thoughts on that because, yes, all eyes are on Columbia this upcoming weekend with this huge matchup and College Game Day being in town as well. Before Game Day happens on Saturday, we're going to have our own game day, Gamecock's Game Day, with myself and Elijah Campbell live at the party lot at Sound and Images from 7 until 9 a.m. So before you go over to Game Day, come on and hang out with us, and we'll get you set for South Carolina football against LSU. And then network coverage kicks in at 9, leading you up to kickoff at noon, all right here on The Game. More Beamer's thoughts from yesterday at his presser coming up next here on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on The Game.
All right, guys, you know it. Every single episode of this show presented by our great friends at Firehouse Subs. Head on over right now, firehousesubs.com, or get the Firehouse Subs app. Actually, you know what? I'm going to trust that you already have the Firehouse Subs app. So just go ahead and tap it on your phone screen and hit the Rapid Rescue. Order your lunch right now. They're going to be waiting for you on the shelf when you walk right in. The most efficient and best way to order your sub is, again, that Rapid Rescue to go at firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app. If you're tailgating on Saturday, which I know pretty much all of you are, a great thing for your tailgate is to hit the catering button on firehousesubs.com as well, where you can get a complete platter for however many people you may need out there, either before the game or if you're tailgating after the game for an early game. Firehouse Subs will have you covered. Again, firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell along with you on this Wednesday, turning our attention to LSU this upcoming weekend. Of course, a lot of hype with game day and stuff being in town, which is huge, obviously, for the game itself and for the program that we have now. But there's also a lot of significance to the future of this program having the national spotlight on you. And that was something that Coach Beamer actually got asked about yesterday in his weekly press. So let's go cut number 2 here, Dave. What does the impact of College Game Day have on the recruits that are going to be in town this weekend and all the buzz around this program?
No, I do. I think it's certainly the way we played Saturday. We had a lot of people that were already interested in us, but we were fortunate that Saturday in Lexington, that was really the only game on. There were a couple other ones, but it was kind of the premier game across all channels. So there were a lot of eyes that were watching our game on Saturday, a lot of recruits that were watching that game on Saturday and saw us playing freshmen. And Monday nights we work late, but we take an hour from 6:30 to 7:30 as a staff and just FaceTime recruits for an hour straight. And we probably talked to 30 kids last night, and that's what they were all saying was, man, y'all were balling against Kentucky and whatever else, and that defense and those freshmen and Dylan Stewart and all that stuff. That's great. And then so that already had excitement. Then game days announced that they're coming. That just created even more excitement with fans, recruits, our players. But yeah, I believe absolutely, NIL, it's a different time. Transfer portal, it's a different time. But having, those players, they watch that show and they know who those guys are, and they know that, Reese Davis and Kirk Herbstreit and Lee Corso and Nick Saban and Pat McAfee are going to be here this week. Desmond Howard are going to be here this week as well. So they know who those guys are. And even if they don't, they know that when game day comes to town, that's a big deal as well. And that's a test. I told our players this morning, it's a testament to them and LSU that they want to come and be a part of this thing and get used to it.
And I heard Bill and Preston talking about this yesterday morning, and Preston brought up a really good point. It's not just the guys that are on campus here. It's them, sharing videos and pictures on social media. It's them showing the environment and how great Columbia can be with a great atmosphere that's going out there to these other guys that aren't here on campus, that are maybe thinking about South Carolina, being recruited by this coaching staff. So this goes far and wide with how big of a weekend this is, not only for the team right now, but for the future of this program as well.
Yeah, I think you got to take advantage of it, right? Like, you're sitting there 2-0, you've done your part, and, you basically booted Kentucky from this spot, which makes it all the more sweeter, in my opinion. But you've created this opportunity, now go take advantage of it. And I think for me, I've kind of in the past talked about my game day index, which is like the Waffle House index, but for college football relevance. And part of the game day index is just, do they pick your game on game day? You want to be consistently one of the games that they're picking on college game day. But also you want to have game day on your campus. And for South Carolina, yeah, they've been featured on game day. In Charlotte last year, Darius Rucker was the picker then. That was helpful.
Sure.
But it's a whole different ball game when they're on your campus. And, I think you're going to have a very cool, unique view being in Gamecock Park now. The very first time they did game day, it was actually in the fairgrounds. That was before all the development over there. Then for a long stretch, they would have it, of course, in the Horseshoe, which was, I think, a beautiful backdrop, but is not near your stadium. Because it's a noon kickoff, and obviously game day is from 9 to noon, having it in Gamecock Park, which is a fairly new development still for South Carolina with the stadium in the background, all the other stuff with that new sort of almost a football campus over there, is, I think, going to be really, really cool. They'll move it inside the stadium for the final hour, which is the first time that's ever happened, game day in Williams-Brice Stadium. I do find when Chris and I talk to recruits, this is not the case necessarily with in-state kids, but when you have out-of-state kids that come onto campus, they are somewhat blown away at times that, South Carolina has just as good a SEC facilities as all the other major programs do in this conference. So if you can grab the attention of 2 extra guys at home that are top recruits, or 10 extra guys that say, oh, man, maybe I want to visit South Carolina, that atmosphere looks awesome, that helps, that resonates. Now, I do think, you've got most of the viewing eyes are probably going to be on your game to start the day. I don't know what else is at noon.
Wisconsin, Alabama. That's also noon on Fox.
Okay, so that's probably the 2 games people may be watching. Take advantage of that as well. Take advantage of the fact that the other thing is, if you win this game, you will be one of the top stories for that day, just because ESPN typically sort of highlights the campus they're on.
Yeah, well, I mean, Herbie's calling the game, here as well, so you're going to have the premier voice of college football calling the game too. So, yeah, you have an opportunity to really spread your word far and wide if you come out on the right side of this thing this weekend.
Dealing with success is something that and y'all know it if you're listening, if you're a longtime Gamecock fan, this is not this staff thing. This is not a must champion. This is I would dare say, deeply rooted thing. Dealing with success has always been something South Carolina could do better. Now, some of that is you do have one of the most passionate fan bases that exists. So when things are down, they're going to take that a little bit tougher than some people. When there's a reason to have hope and to sort of build hype and be excited, Carolina fans are going to do it better than most. So I think dealing with some success last week, going into this game, this moment is great, but you can't play to the moment. You have to just go play your game. And that sounds like a cliche, but it's really easy to get caught up in the moment of things versus just doing what you've been taught to do, what you've been coached to do. So I think for Carolina, that to me is a key to this game. Do not let, it's going to be a crazy atmosphere. Do not let that affect this game to a negative extent.
And that's something Beamer spoke to a little bit yesterday as well. It's really easy, coming off the Old Dominion game when we were all very down on the team saying, man, that didn't look good. You won, but hey, I don't know how Kentucky's going to go, to use that as your fuel. Like, hey, nobody believes in us. You talked about lazy nerves and all that kind of stuff. Well, now everybody's patting you on the back. Now everybody is hyping you up saying, hey, you're better than we thought you were. And you did great on Saturday. Like, how do you keep that same mindset of, all right, just focus on the main goal, go in there, not fall into a sense of security at practice. Like, we got this. We did fine against Kentucky, and, don't go as hard on that rep or whatever it may be to try and stay locked in. Because, again, this is going to be the toughest test you've had this season so far.
Yeah, and Beamer talked, he's talked a little bit in the past about this, but I thought it was interesting. During the Kentucky game, the sideline reporter mentioned how Beamer challenges the older guys on defense by, being kind of harsh, honestly, but because he knows they're veterans and they can take it and he knows what kind of fuels them. But I think you're probably all week in practice, you're telling people, hey, nobody thinks you can get pressure on that quarterback because of that offensive line. That's the best offensive line in the country over there. People think you're going to be outmatched. And even though you won the game last week, you're still over a touchdown underdog this week in your house. People are even saying game day shouldn't even be here. So can you prove to them that thought is incorrect? And so I think you lean into that if you're South Carolina on the defensive side. I think on the offensive side, you're still just in confidence building mode because you do have a much either younger in the cases of like your quarterback, some of your wide receivers, and you're definitely new at a lot of those positions in terms of being transfers in. So I think you take two different approaches on this thing. Offense, confidence, confidence, confidence. Defense, challenge, challenge, challenge.
Absolutely. We'll come back, wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Cole Hublick, who is in tune with everything going on with the SEC, had his thoughts on South Carolina and their performance against Kentucky. We'll see what he had to say. Coming up next, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour here on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Wes along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. Reminder, the Loyola Lisa Special Teams Touchdown Contest rolls into week number 3. $300 up for grabs this weekend if South Carolina can get a special teams touchdown against LSU. And you can go online to 1075thegame.com and register for your chance to win that money whenever that special teams touchdown does end up happening. Cole Kublake, very in tune with the SEC, of course, on our sister station, Jocks FM out there in Birmingham on the SEC Network, has his own podcast, and every Sunday puts out his detailed thoughts on every SEC team and how they performed over the weekend. And as you would expect, very complimentary of what he saw from South Carolina's defense, talking about TJ Sanders, DeAndre Jules, obviously Dylan Stewart, Debo Williams. Everybody that you think should be highlighted is certainly highlighted in this, and you're a very loyal listener to his podcast, and plenty of praise going South Carolina's way this week.
Yeah, we got to try to have Cole on the show because I've become a huge fan. For one, just of the prep work he does to go through all the games is incredible. As someone who tries to go back and just rewatch South Carolina's and whoever they're playing next, and he goes through all the SEC games, and it's really good stuff. The podcast goes through every single SEC game, but also if you want to just get an idea real quick of kind of where things are with South Carolina and the upcoming opponent, you can easily go listen to the South Carolina section and then, in this case, like the LSU section. And so, you know, I think he hit all the high points that we've talked about with the Kentucky game. I thought it was kind of noteworthy. A guy we've talked about quite a bit here locally in terms of waiting on that light bulb to kind of come on. He was very high, and I always think it's noteworthy when maybe a national or regional guy notices something that you've been talking about on a local standpoint. The day Vakari Swain had.
Yes.
I mean, we've always known and talked about how just physically gifted he is. Now, getting on the field goes well beyond just being physically gifted. There's kind of a trust level you have to build with your coaches in that, all right, you know where you're supposed to be. You know what your role is. You know what the specifics of your, especially in the secondary now, where one mistake leads to a touchdown. But, man, this dude is gifted, and he played the most he has played since he got to South Carolina, 33 snaps. He was incredibly active. He's willing to be physical. They used him on cornerback blitz a time or two. He's very difficult in terms of picking him up because he's twitchy. He can get underneath blocks and, again, is willing to be physical, which is something you'd always see with a cornerback. That maybe goes back to the fact he played safety in high school. So I don't want to overstate it, but I do think the potential emergence of Vakari Swain, who did play the most he's played in his young career, and it didn't appear there was an injury to cause that.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just part of the rotation now. LSU is going to test you down the field. It's not going to be like last week. There may be more time. There definitely will be more time to throw. So if at times you're Carolina, and I'm not really down on anybody else that's playing in the secondary,
sure,
but if there are times where you say, hey, we need somebody that's just a edge more athletic on the outside, this could be a pretty big potential emergence for your defense if what we saw from Swain in those 33 snaps is what you're about to get from him. I think it raises the overall potential of what this defense could be.
Yeah, and Chris and I talked about this quite a bit yesterday, and we talked about, you know, Swain's performance, and obviously it got to the point in the game where it was clear that Kentucky could not throw the ball, and, you know, he's your best option when it comes to coming in on those blitzes, you know, from the secondary, just because of his athleticism. How do you balance that with the team that is going to have more of an MO with trying to throw the ball, where you want to have those guys in coverage to account for all those good receivers that they have? I think that's going to be an interesting balance this weekend against LSU to see how Clayton White tries to balance that and what they decide to do with him.
Yeah, and man, watching what they do so far, like Garrett Nussmeier, is he Jaden Daniels? No. But this dude can deliver the football. And like I said, man, they are very aggressive. They had to replace, obviously, not only Jaden Daniels, but they had to replace Brian Thomas, the LSU version, and Malik Neighbors, both in the first round as well.
Yep.
So they replaced an all-star team of offensive guys, which it kind of goes to show you just how bad their defense was. That they had a quarterback who ran for over 1,000 yards, passed for almost 4,000 yards, 2 1,000-plus yard receivers. One of them was a 1,500-plus yard receiver. The other was, I think, almost 1,200 yards. You have a tight end on this team that actually is quietly, I think, about to set a career record for tight end production at LSU. And you had some pretty good running backs and a Joe Moore Award finalist offensive line. But your season was completely blown up by the fact you could not stop anyone.
Right.
And so this is a little bit more balanced LSU team, I think. Blake Baker, heck of a coach. Can you fix all those issues in one off season and a couple of games? I would say no. Like, there should be some things South Carolina can exploit this week, whether or not a young/new Carolina offense is able to execute consistently enough at a high enough level in order to do so will determine a lot.
And I think that's a benefit of getting LSU where you get them. It is week 3 in the season. I'm talking to Matthew Brune earlier on in the hour about just like what they're doing with Harold Perkins, where they're still trying to figure out how to get the most out of him at linebacker. You're playing a team that's still trying to answer those questions in week number 3 as opposed to if you're playing them in week number 10 where they may have things a little bit more figured out. So hopefully that plays into the advantage of South Carolina this week, and it's going to be a tooth and nail kind of game, one you're going to have to not make any mistakes, shoot yourself in the foot, because that could end up costing you. But certainly going to be very exciting to see what happens on Saturday, and hopefully with the eyes of the nation upon Columbia, South Carolina, Carolina can put in a good performance against the Tigers.
Yep. Hey, not in the barn yet. We still got a couple of days to talk about it. Coordinators talking later today as well.
Tomorrow we'll be out at Goal Line Framing once again.
We will. Goal Line Framing live out there for 3 hours. Come by and see us. We'll have some, maybe some giveaways, maybe some tickets. Hopefully Josh joins us this time.
If he shows up.
Yeah, come see us. Come hang out at Goal Line.
Have a good time. That's coming up tomorrow from 9 until noon at Gold Line Framing out there in West Columbia. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with myself, Terry Ford, coming up next on your Wednesday here on the game.